Шановні колеги, будемо день. До слова запрошую.
Dear colleagues, we continue our working day, and I invite to the microphone first Deputy Head of the OSCE SMM mission, Mr. Alexander Hook.
Good afternoon, dear friends. I would like to start with a few statistics. Last week, the number of ceasefire violations recorded by the OSCE Special Monitoring Mission increased by an approximately 150% compared to the week before. It was the highest number over the course of the year. Of those ceasefire violations, 3,444 were explosions caused by mortars, artillery, tanks, and multiple launch rocket systems. As you can see from the graph here, this represents a dramatic increase in the use of these Minsk-proscribed weapons. A six-fold increase on the previous week. It was in fact the highest number of such explosions ever recorded. A staggering 2/3 of these explosions from proscribed weapons were recorded in the western Luhansk region. In areas around Novosavinka, Kalinove, Veslechorivka, and Troitske, our monitors witnessed particularly violent nighttime artillery and MLRS exchanges. Over the week in these areas, they recorded at least 2,148 explosions from artillery, 113 from MLRS, and 55 from mortars. Let's be clear. These are more than just statistics. Many of these explosions and other ceasefire violations are happening in and around populated areas. As you can see from this slide here, most of the violence, with the exception of the Mariupol area, is taking place along an arc stretching from Marinka all the way northeast to Popasna. And from this slide, you can see that many of the population centers of Donbas are along that arc. Hundreds of thousands of people are on a daily basis exposed to fire from mortars, artillery, MLRS, and small arms. So when there are explosions, invariably there are consequences. Our monitors last week saw the aftermath of many of these impacts. In Popasna, for instance, they saw two heavily damaged houses, the result of a 120mm mortar fire. And in Pikuzi, formerly Kominternoe, they saw similar damage to people's homes, also caused by 120mm mortar rounds. The impact can also be directly on people. Last week, in fact, recorded double the number of civilian casualties compared to the previous week. In Bryanka, in Luhansk region, our monitors saw what just one of those 3,444 explosions can do to human beings. There they saw the mangled remains of an 85-year-old man whose home had sustained a direct hit from a 152mm artillery shell. In the intensive care unit of a hospital in Toretsk, they saw the human cost of another of those 3,444 explosions. There they observed a 49-year-old man severely injured when a shell impacted close to his car as he was driving near Verkhonotorovsky. How much longer must such senseless killing and maiming go on? Those who are controlling the violence seem to think it is an acceptable level of violence. The increased violence we saw last week suggests they have no intention to stop this madness. I'm sure those controlling the violence were not among those killed and injured last week. Now, dear friends, make no mistake, it is largely the innocent who are dying and being maimed in this conflict, as is the case in all conflicts. I'm almost certain there were no decision makers at the checkpoints along the contact line last week either. The people at entry-exit checkpoints there are forced to wait for hours and hours, sometimes days, in freezing conditions with a few, if any, services. Last week, our monitors spoke to one woman traveling with her child who said has a disability and respiratory problems. She said it had taken her 2 days to cross from Mayorsk into so-called DPR-controlled areas. They are also subjected to mortar and artillery fire. While our monitors were speaking to that woman, over a 35-minute period, they heard 4 explosions, one of them 3 kilometers away. There was a similar scene at the entry-exit checkpoint in Berezove. With over 400 vehicles and 300 pedestrians waiting in line, 2 explosions and 8 bursts of small arms fire were heard. In some instances, people have been stuck between positions. They pass through one checkpoint and must wait to be processed at the checkpoint on the other side of the contact line. But sometimes the checkpoint closes, leaving them stranded overnight in highly dangerous areas. I ask those making decisions, at the very least, to coordinate opening and closing times to ensure this kind of situation is not repeated. Given the numbers of people wishing to pass through entry-exit checkpoints, ideally, these checkpoints should be open 24/7. They should also, as a matter of urgency, speed up the procedures to minimize waiting times. I understand and acknowledge that the Ukrainian authorities have a right, and indeed a duty, to provide security arrangements. But the thousands of people crossing the contact line are Ukrainian citizens living in Ukraine, moving from one part of Ukraine to another. Dear friends, the price the people of Donbass are paying is too high. The impact on their lives is mounting. Last week's figures demonstrate one important feature of this conflict: its volatility. Violence begets violence. It must be stopped now. Concrete steps must be taken immediately. One of those steps is full implementation of the framework decision of the Trilateral Contact Group relating to the disengagement of forces and hardware of 21st September this year. We know that disengagement works. Last week, in the disengagement areas of Petriske and Solote, for instance, we recorded no ceasefire violations. In Stanica Luhanska, where the sides have also agreed to disengage, there has been no progress in doing so. The sites are still within less than 300 meters from another, and every day our monitors see craters and damage, the impact of violence of the night before, in which armed men, just 300 meters apart, had fired at another with automatic and under-barreled grenade launchers. They need to disengage. The men at these positions doing the actual firing are also paying a heavy price. Last week, we recorded injuries inflicted on 2 Ukrainian armed forces soldiers hit by shrapnel in Marinka and a so-called LPR demining engineer near Shovot. Dear friends, 2.5 years ago, we first arrived in Ukraine, we heard from many people saying many different things. There was a lot of anger and fear over many different issues. We have almost 600 OSCE SMM monitors deployed across Donbas. In freezing and often dangerous conditions, they monitor 24/7. Last week, they had a Ukrainian armed forces soldier in Stanica Luhanska threaten their lives by pulling a pin from a live grenade in front of them. In Pikuzi, formerly Komiternove, so-called armed DPR members threatened to shoot other SMM monitors. The monitors had just spotted a tank in violation of agreed withdrawal lines and subsequently saw an additional 2 tanks in the village. But they still go out every day and do their job, monitoring, recording, bearing witness, and listening to the people of Donbas. There is now, after over more than 2 years of violence, one consistent thing the people of Donbas tell them. One consistent message from both sides of the contact line: stop the violence and stop it now. Now, as usual, at the end of my statement here, I would like to inform you about the latest mission numbers. As of today, the mission has 678 monitors, of whom 580 are deployed in the east. In addition, there are 323 Ukrainian colleagues and another 94 international staff working for the SMM. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hook. Чи є питання або уточнення, колеги? We don't have any questions, so at this point the press conference is finished. Thank you for coming and looking forward to seeing you here next week.
Okay, thank you.
Шановні колеги, наступна подія о 13:30.
Our next event will be at